Hello everybody, and welcome back to my workshop for another of my Jeti training videos. And as we reach the end of December 2024, may I wish you all a happy new year for 2025, and I hope you all have good model flying weather. Now, this video is in response to a request I received from Steve, who flies gliders, and wanted a very specific style to operate the crow brakes and the pop-up spoilers. So what we have here is the elevator servo, the two aileron servos on the outside, the pop-up spoilers, and the flaps. And what Steve wants to happen is this. In the first third of the stick travel, the flaps only work, and they will go to full down effect. In the second third of the stick travel, the ailerons move up to give the full crow braking effect, and in the final third of travel, the spoilers come all the way up. And Steve thinks it might take a lot of trial and error to find the trim compensation curve here for the elevator. And it would be if you had to do it manually, but I will show you a trick that will give you the most complex of compensation curves in a couple of fly pasts in the air in seconds without taking your fingers off the sticks or your eyes off the model. I'll also show you how to offset the flap servos, because there's the flap servos at their neutral point, and some people might just live with that. I've got a bit of aileron to flap mixing, as you can see. But I prefer to move the servos much of the way around for the flaps and adjust the length of the push rods so that you get a lot of flap travel, because you need very little upwards travel when you've got mixing with ailerons. So I'll show you how to do that and yet retain full travel. And I will also show you how, once you've got the flaps in the fully down position, you've got rid of the mixing nice and smoothly. And the reason for that is, frankly, at that amount of flap travel, any change to the flaps from aileron mixing will not change the lift, so it won't really give you any roll, but it will give you phenomenal drag and adverse yaw, which will work against you. So it smoothly mixes the flaps out, even though we're only moving the stick 1/3 of the way. It will do the job. Let's have a look at the programming that's involved. But before we do that, can I say that if you're used to my videos, you realize you don't have to put up with messages from my sponsor as I try to flog you VPNs or security devices or whatever. So please do me the favor of liking the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. It would help me, because it takes quite a long time actually to put together all the bits and pieces for these videos, check the programming, do the video, do the editing, get it out there. And I really would appreciate it if you'd just take the few seconds to like, subscribe. The time it takes could be spent building my 5th scale Vampire, which has now reached 2.5 years, and it's nearly ready for flight. So, just as a little thank you, if you would like and subscribe. And also, in the description box below, there is a link for PayPal if you'd wish to make a little donation towards my espresso coffee and chocolate biscuit fund. Much appreciated. Let's have a look at how this model then is set up. We'll go first into the basic properties. I've set it up as a 2-flap, 2 aileron, no engines, and a couple of air brake servos. The functions assignment. The air brake I've assigned to the P4 stick. The flaps I have removed any control assignment, and I've added another function called brake and assigned that to P4, and we'll be using that to do the mixing. So we don't need any servos assigned to this. It's a virtual function. And you don't need to move the servos around. I've moved them around partly to fit on a 7-channel receiver, And partly to make it easy when we're looking at servo movements in the monitor, the ailerons, the flaps, the air brakes are all lined up. Okay. So the first thing we'll do is mix the aileron to the flaps. Nice and straightforward. Actually, seeing that reminds me, I've popped in some flight modes, speed and thermal, just to be able to prove to you with what we do with the flaps later that your flight modes still have exactly the correct effect. So down to our free mixes, we'll mix from aileron to the flaps, and I'll give it, for the sake of argument, what we have, 20%. Yep. Say okay to that. Here, have a look at it. Now, 1 and 2 are the aileron. There we go. 3 and 4 are the flaps. So you can see they're going nicely. Next, let's set up the brake lever, P4, to flaps. So, again, free mix, plus, so here's our virtual control brake to the flaps. And a little reminder popped up there, it was offering to mix from butterfly. Why am I not using the butterfly menu to do this? Well, it's because the butterfly menu assumes everything will happen proportionally over the entire stick movement, and there is no option to set up a curve in there. And of course, what we're trying to do is get the flaps to move only in the first third of the movement, and the ailerons to move only in the second third of movement. So we're doing mixing because that gives us curves. So come down here, and what shall we say? Brake to flaps. We'll give it a master value of 100%. And the important thing here is the curve. We'll set it to a 3-point. Come down to those points. And now let's move the stick. You see the little target symbols moving. So that's, for me, stick fully forward, brakes closed. It would be the other way around if you like your stick fully back for brakes closed. And there's brakes fully open at that end. So what I want to do is manipulate this curve. So that will stay where it is. And then I'll want the midpoint, which I can select by pressing the button, to come all the way down to fully open. Like that. And I want it to be when the stick has moved a third of its way. And because we're looking at 200% here, it's going to be down 66% from the right hand end. So what I can do is use these buttons, sorry, the left and right buttons, to move that point. So if I move it along, as you can see, the value here is changing. Go to 33%. That's it. So it's moved 67% there, 33%, and then the 100% there. So that's 1/3 of the way. And that will do the business of moving the flaps the whole way in the first third of the stick. So we say OK to that, have a look at the output. And remember, 3 and 4 are flaps, so they're now in the fully up position. It goes to the fully down position. Ignore 5 and 6 at the moment. We're coming to them. They are the spoilers. But what that would do is move your flap servos to the fully up position, which you don't want. You want your flap servos at the moment at neutral. We'll build in the offset later, because some people might just have them at neutral. So we'll come back to the curve. Oops. Come up to that point there and move it down to 0. Now let's have a look at the effect on the servos. Now 3 and 4, your flap servos, are at the midpoint. Pulling the stick back 1/3 of the way gets them fully opened, and the rest of the stick movement does nothing. Okay, so that takes care of that with no servo offset for the flaps at the moment. Next, let's have a look at our brakes to ailerons. So again, a mixer plus from the brake to ailerons. Again, we'll go with a master value of 100%. And the curve, now this is the more interesting one, because we'd like a 4-point curve here, but it doesn't offer us that, so we'll go for a 5-point curve. There we are, come down to here. Once again, if we operate the stick, there's, for me, P4 fully forward, brakes closed, P4 back, brakes open. In other words, up go the ailerons, and ailerons to neutral here. And we need to bring that down to the 0 line, because when we have this stick anywhere, we don't want it moving the ailerons out of place when it's at no brake. So the aileron servos need to be at neutral. Come back a point. Now this needs to come down to the 0 line, and we'll move it left until we get to the 33% point. There it is. Now the next point along, if we press the escape button, we move back a point. That can go down to ailerons fully up, but we need to move it left again, get it to 33%. Come back a point using the escape button, bring that down to 0 as well, or minus 100 I should say. And there we are. So in the middle third of the stick travel, the ailerons will go from neutral to fully up. I mean, you might need to move your curve the other way depending on which way your servos move, but you get the idea. So let's have a look at the effect. So there's the flaps. As I move the stick, the flaps go all the way down in the first third, and as soon as we've reached full flap at 1/3 stick, now the ailerons start coming up, and I get to 2/3 stick, the ailerons are all the way up. So that's 2 out of the 3 done. Let's have a look at the spoilers, which of course at the moment are operating over the full stick range. And for that we can just use its function curve. We don't need to mix to it. Let's go into its function curve. Air brake. And we only need a 3-point curve for this one. Down here. As before, the gun sight target thing is up there with the stick at the brakes closed position. That's the brakes open position. So all I need to do is move the center point up to there and then use the left button to bring it along, whoops-a-daisy, until that says minus 33. There we are. So what will happen as you move the stick 2/3 of the way, the brakes don't move, and then in the final third they move the whole thing. Let's take a look at it. Servo monitor, normal flying around, brakes are closed. So I'll start pulling the stick back. First thing that happens is the flaps come down. In the first third of the stick travel, they've reached full weight, and then in the middle third, ailerons come up, and in the final third, spoilers travel their full range. Now let's pop in some values for the flaps in the flight modes, just to prove that once we shift the center point of the flaps, it all goes with it. So we'll go into there. I've got the speed and thermal set up for my switch. Let's come to the flight mode trim, flaps. I'll go to speed mode, and I need these to be separate. So come back in here, and I'll give it 20% go to thermal mode, 20% the other direction. These are just to demonstrate it and not actual values. So there we are. There's that working. Let's have a look at it. 3 and 4 are the flaps, so speed mode, thermal mode. Let's shift the center point of the flap servos so that the bulk of their travel is available for pulling the flaps down, and only a little bit is available for mixing the aileron up onto the flap. And we can do that in the butterfly menu. And the reason I'm using that rather than, say, the flight mode trim is that there's a lot more adjustment available here. We need a control for it, so we say plus, logical switches, and at the bottom of the logical switch list is log max, which basically means it's switched on. So say OK to that. Otherwise, anything you do in the aileron flaps adjustment won't do anything. And we'll say that the flaps go to, what should we have? 80%? Yep. So now what will happen is that the flap servo neutral point is going to shift round to plus 80%, which will leave us 180% travel to pull the flaps down and only 20% travel to put the flaps up when the aileron's mixed into them. Much more mechanically suitable for pulling flaps down when there's very little up travel required. And we'll see the effects on this and how we overcome any little issues. So let's say OK to that and have a look at servo monitor. And now the flaps, instead of being at neutral, are at 80%. But it all still works in our programming so far. I will pull the stick back 1/3 of the way, and we get the full 100% travel of the flaps, which you think, that's not 100%. Well, it kind of is, because it's gone from -80 to +20 on this side, or +80 to -20 on that side. And we'll look at a second in how we overcome that. But let's check the rest of it. No changes, middle third, up come the ailerons, final third, out go the spoilers. So how do we get the flaps to travel that bit of the offset? Incidentally, let's have a look at this little bit of it. The mixing still works from the ailerons. And what else is in there? Yes, the flight modes. So we can see our flight modes still work exactly as they did before, even though we've shifted the center point so far. Now, if we come back to our mixing, here is our brake to flaps. We can't increase it any more than 100%. But what we can do is add another mixer. And because we've put a curve in this one, to save ourselves reprogramming it, we'll copy the brake to flaps. It's lovely. But we'll just make it 20%. 80%, not 20%. We'll remove 20% from it. So the two mixes from brake to flap will add up now. Say OK to that. Let's have a look. Back to servo monitor. Here's our flaps at their mid position, although the servo is well offset. And there we are. We can now get the full from 80% on one side to 100% on the other side travel in that first third of the stick. Then up come the ailerons, out come the spoilers. So basically everything's been achieved. There is a little fly in the ointment. If we go to full brake, or any point at least where the flaps are fully deployed, of course the aileron mix still adds in, which is not good news. First of all, it drives that servo perhaps past the point we want, especially if we're going to full flap. But also, as I think I mentioned before, you don't really change the lift, but you change the drag enormously, and what you get is massive adverse yaw, which is likely to cause the aircraft to roll in the opposite direction from the one you've applied the aileron. So let's remove that, and we can do that in free mixing, ailerons to flaps, come down here, and we'll do it in the switch. Now we could simply use some point of the P4 stick, that's our brake stick, to switch the mix off, and that's perfectly valid. But I'll show you how to, a sneaky way of smoothly removing it, even in just 1/3 of the stick travel. Oops, I've moved the stick there, clear that out. So we'll say plus channel. And what we're going to use is that full range of the flap movement. So we're not looking at the third of the stick, we're actually looking at the servo, which goes from one end to the other. And we don't get quite 100% here because we've got funny travels going on, but it's near enough. And if I move the stick, what it's reading is the servo output there, and it gets to 0 at 1/3 stick. So when the flaps are fully open, I've got that. For that, I've got center switched off, but I've got this reversed so that it's stick fully forward. I've got the maximum value, and now flap stick at 1/3, I've got 0%. So no mixing would happen. Say OK to that. Let's have a look at the effect on the servos. So no brakes. The aileron to flap mixing is working. As I start moving the brake, the amount of mixing is reducing until at full flap, the mix has gone completely. Now, I said that there's a lovely way to set up a complex elevator trim compensation curve very quickly in the air, but without taking your fingers off the sticks or your eyes off the model. And that is to use the Crow Brake Lua app trim that Dave McQueenie and I worked together on. If we have a look at applications, user apps, DFM Crow, that's the beastie. Adaptive Crow Mixer it calls it. And say OK to that. I'm not going to go through all the fine points of how to get this and set it up. That's already been done in a video. And at the end of this video, there will be 2 boxes on the left-hand side of the screen. The top left box, I will put in a link to the video on how to set up the Adaptive Crow Mixer. In the bottom left box will be a box for you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Let's very quickly pop it in and show you how to do it. We need an additional function. So plus, we'll call it Crow. Okay, and its control is going to come from user applications. There we are, the Adaptive Crow value. Just say OK to that. And we'll need a mixer. So free mix plus from Crow to elevator give it 100%. OK to that. Back to our app. The Crow control is going to be the P4 stick. We need it as proportional. I have a feeling we leave it like that. Say OK. But reverse Crow control with the stick forward, yes, I'll show you how to work out if you need that in a second. Auto Crow on-off control, I need to assign a switch. Say OK. And the elevator control, I'll move that. It's proportional. OK to that. Into the Crow settings. I'm happy to leave it as 7 points, linear, 300 autocorrects per linear. Announce the unset trim points. I'm going to leave that on for a second, but I always use it with that switched off because it diverts your attention. And what I found is people get hung up trying to set the points that are being announced instead of just watch the model, watch what it does, ignore what the points are. But I'm going to leave it on for a second to show you this. Say OK. I'll turn the volume up, would help.
5, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Now what it's announcing there is the points as I move the P4 stick, and with the P4 stick at the brakes closed position, I want it to be at point 0. So that's how I know to reverse my crow control, like that. So now, instead of counting down, it'll count upwards as I open the brakes.
1, 2, 3, 1.
Good. And finally, you don't have to, but it's nice to see a visual representation of it, displayed telemetry plus Lua Chromix curve. Say OK. And there is the Chromix curve with the 7 points. Now, all you do is fly your model, get it set up high, put it into some sort of landing approach attitude that you wish, slightly nose down, say, and start moving your brake point. I'm going to go back to Applications, Adaptive Crow Mixer, and switch off announcing the trim points, because I say I don't think you should be using it. And there is the brake closed position. There's the brakes fully open position. So you get your model in flight, you switch on your Adaptive Crow Mixer, which starts warning you that it's on.
Autocrow.
And you start opening the brakes. And as you do, you just move the elevator stick as required to get the compensation you want.
Autocrow. Autocrow. Autocrow.
And then you switch that off. The compensation is still there, but it's no longer moving the points when I move the elevator stick. See, I'm moving the elevator stick, you can probably hear that. It doesn't move the points. If I switch the Auto Crow Mixer on again, it will do. So in one fly past of the slope or landing site from a good height, you can get it fairly well tuned in like this. Turn round, go around one more time, come back in, switch your Auto Crow on, and make any fine adjustment nudges with your elevator stick to get it just where you want it. Switch it off. The reason for it saying Auto Crow, Auto Crow, Auto Crow is to remind you it's switched on, and you need to switch it off, otherwise it'll keep adjusting the points. And that is what does it for us. So if we now have a look at it, Servo 7 is the elevator. As I start to move the brake stick, you can see the elevator trim moves around. So you can get a very complex curve, get the model beautifully adjusted. And there you are. I think that's it. Have fun with it, folks.